Hello, mate, it's Rife Nation. I've got a return guest. I think of Dr. David Brownstein every single day of my life. Why? Because I dispense hydrogen peroxide nebulization bags every single day. I do IV hydrogen peroxide every single day in the practice. It has been a game changer. It literally has been a game changer. And so I'm grateful to this man because he's a pioneer. He's courageous. He's board certified and he's a family physician. He's written 16 books. Highly recommend that we go to his website, and we'll put a link to the first episode with him. But it is an honor and a privilege always to speak to him because he's a wealth of wisdom, a very humble man, but I think he has got the skills and the tools to really treat almost any disease. And I say that with full confidence as a physician for the last 24 years. Welcome back to the show, Dr. David Brownstein.
Wow, thank you for having me. That was some introduction. And it's interesting to hear you talk about peroxide because it's every single day in my practice as well. And it's a really cool therapy, which we could talk about.
Brilliant. Now, Dr. Brownstein, you've been in practice over 30 years. I think your two children are physicians. You've got a wealth of experience. I really want you to sort of just talk about things that are interesting you with regards to the immune system, because I mean, this immune system is so complex. I think there's so many new things that are happening. And there's always the old foundational principles that we return to. But tell us a little bit about what you've learned in the last 3 years, obviously with the coronavirus and you having a lot of experience in holistic medicine. In fact, those that are listening, Dr. Brownstein was one of the earliest pioneers in holistic medicine as an integrative physician. And so a lot of the things that have been done is because he was brave and he had a lot of courage to do them. So tell us a little bit about what's happened over the last few years.
Well, when COVID started, we all saw the TV. We saw what was going on in Europe, and then we saw those hospital wards in Italy. I think that's the first one we were all looking at, and the refrigerator trucks lined up to gather the bodies, and the modeling. I'm not sure what the modeling in South Africa was, but the modeling in America was miserable. By the end of 2020, we were predicted to have over something like 1.3 to 1.5 million deaths, and I believe over 3 million infections. I don't quite remember the exact numbers, but we didn't flinch in our practice. When the governor of our state closed everything down and said only essential businesses stayed open, told my partners, I'm essential, you're essential, we're staying open. And we all agreed on that. And we felt like, where are the patients going to have to go? There's going to be nothing open except for grocery stores, liquor stores, and emergency rooms. And we weren't going to abandon them. And I'm so disappointed in my colleagues who closed their offices and everyone went virtual, out of this whole fear of a viral illness that, look, it's not to say I wasn't fearful. I was fearful too. I used to I have asthma, used to be a severe case of asthma, used to have inhalers and go on steroids, go to the emergency room every once in a while. And, through adopting a holistic lifestyle, cleaning up my diet and mostly cleaning up my diet, I think that my asthma is pretty much gone. I don't feel it much. But I have asthma. I have scoliosis with a 60-degree curve. Wow. I have lung involvement from that scoliosis. And I have an immune system disorder. I have no IgA. 1% of the population has no IgA. Wow. I'm in the wrong profession. I shouldn't be exposed to all these sick people with viruses, but that's what I chose. And I wasn't running. And it's not that I'm consider myself a brave person at all. I'm not, but I took an oath. I've always wanted to be a doctor, and my oath was to treat sick people. When the AIDS crisis was around, I was in med school, and AIDS exploded when I was in med school and in my residency. And I remember vividly attending physicians and resident physicians, and shying away from the AIDS rooms, and they didn't want contact with those people. I just didn't worry. I didn't think about it back then. I wasn't, my story is in that I remember as a med student on the call at night, patient needed a blood draw. So I'm walking in the room with little Tupperware thing with all the blood draw tubes in there and, the equipment I needed. And my fellow student stops me. He's on my team and he says, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm going to draw this blood work." And he said, "Patient's got AIDS." I'm like, "I know what the patient has." I'm taking, he's on I was one following him. And I said, "He needs his blood drawn." He goes, "I wouldn't." He goes, "I wouldn't do that." And I said to him, "Look, I'm not going to have sex with him, and I'm hopefully not going to poke myself. I'm going to be very careful and not poke myself." But I said, "He needs his blood drawn." He goes, "I'd wait for the morning if a phlebotomy team do it." And I'm like, "Well, he needs it tonight." And I didn't think about it. And, I remember back then, and I didn't, that was 30 years ago, but I remember back then that there were attendings who wouldn't touch these AIDS patients. They wouldn't, they keep a distance in the room and do as little as they could. And, we passed through that, and I didn't really think about it until this crisis came. And then the same thing happens again. My feeling is don't go into medicine if you're not going to treat sick people. And so when this COVID-19 thing came around, I told my staff, look, we have so many treatments available for viruses. Conventional medicine doesn't have much, but holistic medicine's got a lot. And the reason they have a lot is they know how to use things that support the immune system in times of distress. And, you mentioned the immune system, simple things, vitamin C, vitamin A, vitamin D, iodine. But the cleaning up the diet, those of us that truly are holistic practitioners, we breathe this, we eat it, we live it, we dream it, and we study it. And so when, in meeting with my staff, when the staff was like, "We need to close the office, state's closing down," I'm like, "I'm not closing this office." I said, "No one has to work with me. I'll do what I can do alone, but I'd like help if people will stay. And if you don't want to stay, it's okay. No one's job's at risk." I didn't know what was going to happen. Nobody knew. And I was as scared as the rest of them, but I thought we were nimble enough in our practice that we knew how to treat viral infections. We've been treating flu and flu-like illnesses for back then, 25 years or so. And our patients weren't going to the hospital. They weren't dying at anywhere near the reported rates. And 1/3 of those infections were invariably coronavirus infections. We didn't test for it, but that's what's reported every year. And I thought, what's this thing going to be any different for? It should respond unless it's, some dastardly thing out there. And if it is, then we're all going to be in trouble anyways. But I said, look, if our therapy doesn't work, and we had a viral protocol, we'll come up with one. And the first week when we started treating people with it, I don't think I slept. I don't know, wasn't much, maybe a couple hours a night. And I was worried, I was calling people every day, and I pretty much still call people every day who get sick with this. I was calling people every day and worrying, are we going to be able to do this? And are they going to die? And am I going to die? And about a week into this, 10 days into this, I remember, we were working late at night again, and me and my partner were running inside getting stuff, and said to him, "You know what? We got this. I think we got this. I think the patients are improving. Pulse oxes are coming up, just like with other flu-like illnesses over the years." So I think that holistic medicine has a lot to offer, and holistic medicine still has a lot to offer. And the best therapy, the single best therapy of everything we've done during this crisis is how you started this interview off. It's hydrogen peroxide. Those nebulized combination of nebulized peroxide and iodine was the coolest thing I've seen through this therapy. People with these couldn't breathe, their pulse oxes 70s and 80s. They start nebulizing peroxide, usually with the second dose. Their lungs start to open up. They start to feel better. They all told me this. I heard this story over and over and over for 3 years, still hearing it today. Luckily, not as much today because people aren't as sick as they were 3 years ago. But I'm interested in you being in South Africa, since Africa as a continent was, I don't know, spared isn't quite the right word, but you don't see a lot of terrible news coming out of Africa for COVID. So how did South Africa fare through this crisis?
I think fairly well. I think if you look at the data, it was nothing like the Western countries. And I mean, I just think of people that were living in, these shacks with aluminium, covering, and right next to each other. There was no social distancing. There was no hygiene. A lot of the population here is just living third world. They don't have like available water or sanitation, and they weren't dropping like flies like they presumed it would be. So they had a robust, like almost, immunity that people were not expecting. They were saying if it goes through these townships or these communities, it was going to just cause death. It didn't happen at all. So I think the numbers, and looking at an organization called Panda with Nick Hudson and many people that have joined that organization, the numbers were significantly better than the rest of the world. And so if you look back, I just think it's this mass formation psychosis, that's been spoken about, this fear paradigm. And obviously the government bought into that and there was lockdowns. But,
So before let me ask you one question.
Yeah.
So did people get sick with a viral illness during the last 3 years with this illness? Do you think they got sick with COVID, with SARS-CoV-2?
I think they did. Did.
Then you're 100% right on this whole fear thing.
Yeah.
And what that can do to the immune system and just the destructive capabilities of it. Yeah. And you think about people living in Africa, like you said, they're going to the bathroom outside. They're not washing their hands. They're living in huts. They're barely got shoe coverings. My God, look at the US. We spend 20% of our GNP on healthcare.
Yeah.
And we spent trillions of dollars on this thing. And we were the worst of all the Western countries. And what a disaster, especially after what you just reported to me.
Yeah, and I mean it's I think it's ongoing. There's still some significant damage that's happened to a lot of people just because of this sort of fear mongering that went on out there. And I'm hopefully a lot of these, and it's not that we want to now pursue the legal route, but people have to become accountable for their actions and what they did. And so I'm just hoping that it's very fruitful from organizations like Panda, even yourself. I've been listening to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., what's happening in the States. And I think we do need to hold some type of accountability with these people with regards to what was done.
I would agree with that. And, it's the fear that was here was just unbelievable. I'm just so disappointed in my profession that, we allowed this to take hold, and there was no one to speak for the patients. There was nobody standing up. There was a few of us, but there was no one in power. No one in Washington, D.C., no one in the AMA, no one in our organizations to speak up and say, hey, maybe there is another side to this. Maybe we should debate this. Maybe we should talk about this. Maybe we should study this. Maybe we should study whether masks work or not versus just telling everybody they should mask. And maybe we should have some randomized controlled trials on whatever, washing hands, masking, eating good food or whatever it is. And none of that happened from the powers that be here. And we paid a deep price for that, and we're still paying a deep price for it. And but I can tell you, Robert F. Kennedy has a great message. I think I do feel the winds have changed here, and I do feel people have got the fog come out. Their eyes have cleared of the fog a little bit, a lot of them, and I think people are angry right now, and they're looking for someone to help them and to guide them and to change this. And I think that can happen. It's one of the first times I felt like the wind blowing in the right direction for a change. And that started a few months ago. And I do think that if we can get our message across, that, we can make great strides in that.
Brilliant. And I think that's sort of the political, economic sort of agenda that governments had and organizations had and big pharma had. But I want to talk about the details in your life and in your practice, because I'm sure you picked up things and noticed things. We've spoken about hydrogen peroxide and iodine in the last episode and how powerful that is, and, using IVs that are available to some people. But anything that you've learned about the immune system, or any techniques or any products, from natural compounds to herbs to Chinese medicine, or anything that you've sort of thought, hang on, this has really got some traction, it's helped a lot of people?
Well, it's interesting. In conventional medicine, you've got all these expensive drugs you could use, or these expensive therapies. in holistic medicine, there's supplements you can buy and you can, but really, in thinking about the last 3 years, when COVID started, I was focused, I was fearful at the beginning too. So, I would, we kept our viral protocol, which I talked to you about last time, which we can talk about a little bit more if you want. Well, it was high dose vitamins A, C, D, and iodine orally, and nebulized hydrogen peroxide and iodine. And if people needed it, IVs, vitamin C, and hydrogen peroxide with ozone shots. And it was the same viral therapy we've used for close to 3 decades, and proved to be very effective. But one of the things with COVID that really struck me, there were 2 things that struck me. And I've known this, but it just kind of was like slapping me in the face over and over during this crisis. One was people need to move. They can't lie in bed. As sick as they feel, if they, when in the US, when people got COVID and they were hospitalized, one of the reasons we ventilated so many people, I think, was doctors were, look, I think doctors were trying the best they could do, whether they're conventional or holistic. So doctors ventilated people to try and control the airways when people are having trouble breathing. We all know now that the original ventilator settings were a disaster. And, if you got ventilated in 2020, early 2020, there was over an 80% chance you were going to die from COVID, from the wrong ventilator settings. And really we shouldn't have been ventilating so many people. We realized that later. But I also think that part of the reason we were ventilating so many people was it controlled the airways, it controlled the secretions of COVID, and it made it safer for the healthcare personnel. So if they had them in a closed system with a ventilator machine, the healthcare staff wasn't at risk with it. And where am I going with that? What did you asked me?
Yeah, what did you learn? I mean, I think movement.
What have I learned?
Said,
so here's what I learned. Those people that were ventilated were basically lying in bed. And it took us a while to realize, hey, maybe if we flip them over onto their stomach, they might do a little bit better. When we lay them on their back, they get fluid in their lungs. Fluid doesn't move. They're more likely to get pneumonia. So we lay them on their stomach. Well, at the beginning of the crisis, I wasn't telling people who were sick to, I was using the word exercise. I mean, I'm not, of course, when you're sick, you're not going to a gym and you're not going to go do push-ups and sit-ups and things, but you can still walk a little bit, walk even inside your house, in a circle around your living room, or, from your kitchen to your living room or something. And if you're in a one-room little hut, you can walk circle in your hut, but when they started flipping people from the back to the front and reporting that there was some better outcomes with that, I immediately started telling my patients who were sick with COVID, you got to get out of bed. You can't lie in bed. I don't care if you can walk 10 steps, you walk 10 steps, and then you go back to bed. And then next time, try and walk 11 steps, and so on, 12, and then 13, and so on and so on. And then when you got better, you could start walking outside a little bit. And if they weren't sick enough, or if they were not terribly sick, I told them, you got to walk outside a little bit. If it's 5 steps outside, it's fine. But our human body was not made to lie in bed all day, and the lungs get filled with fluid. The lungs can't clear their secretions. And so when we flipped people over with the ventilator on, I immediately started telling my patients, you got to walk. And that got them better. And that was really something you could see. And when he did blood count testing and specific immune system testing, I could tell the people who were more active than not, and because they had better counts. I had a nurse who I saw in the office. She had sarcoidosis with lung involvement, and then got COVID. So she had sarcoidosis bilaterally. She had severe scarring of her lungs going into a COVID illness. So she had a big comorbid condition. She came into my office with her husband, and she was really struggling to breathe. Pulse ox was around 70. I mean, I looked at her, did the pulse ox, listened to her lungs, and said, look, you got to go to the hospital. I told her, we don't want to ventilate you. I don't want you ventilated if you don't need to, but I think you're going to need a rebreather mask on with high flow oxygen. So I called down the air and told them I was sending her over there. And I said to her, you got to get out of bed. I said, I don't care how bad they're not going to come in. Once they put this rebreather or ventilate you, they ain't coming in the room. except for the bare minimum, whatever they're, take your
Yeah.
vitals maybe once or twice a day, and that's it. So they put a rebreather on her, gave her my cell phone, and she's calling me. It's hard to hear her through this rebreather. It's like talking to Darth Vader type person or something. And, she was scared. She said, no one's coming in. She goes, the only thing they do is bring in food a couple times a day and they leave. And, that's it. And they don't change her sheets. They don't change her gown. They don't change her. They don't weigh her. They don't listen to her. I said, when's the last time, a couple days in there, I'm like, when's the last time you saw a doctor? She doesn't know. Doctors aren't coming in. People are coming in to put the food in there. So the nurses barely come in. So I said, you got to get out of bed. And every time I talked to her from the first day she was there, I'm like, she goes, I'm on a tether. And she shows me with her phone, where the tether is. And I'm like, then stand next to that thing with the tether and just stand. So she started doing that. And then the next day I called her and I said, look, tell them to put a longer leash on you. They can just lengthen the cord. And so took, of course, a day or two for them to do that, but they did it. Now she could, with the rebreather on, get out of bed because she still needed it. Yeah. And I remember she said I'd walk circles around the bed and not try and not get tangled in the thing. And I said, start doing knee bends. And she started knee bends. And then she started being able to take the mask off, walk a little further in the room. But she told me she was in that room for 8 days before they changed her sheets, before they changed her gown, before they gave her a bath. And part of it was with this patient, she wasn't vaccinated. This was after the vaccine came out, and they were really pissed that she wasn't vaccinated, and she felt like they were punishing her.
Yeah.
So she told me when she got out of the hospital and came to me, she was in the hospital maybe 9 or 10 days, that if she didn't get out of bed, she felt like she would have suffocated to death. That really seemed to help her each time she did it. And the other interesting story with her was she's in the hospital. She's an RN. She's not breathing and she's not feeling good, but she's tough. This is a tough one, and she's smart. And so gave her my cell phone. So she calls me up and says, or texts me and says, they want to give me Molnupiravir. What do you think? So I said, the big study in New England Journal of Medicine showed it wasn't very helpful against COVID. So I pulled the study up on my phone. I cut out, I was very proud of myself. I was able to actually do this without my children helping me. I cut out the conclusion and circled in red where it said there's no difference between treated and untreated patients, in regards to severe outcomes or something like that. Basically, there's no difference. And so I said, show him. So she said, first doctor comes in, shows him on the phone, turns around and walks out. The attending comes in next. That was a resident. She shows him on the phone. He walks out. The infectious disease doctor comes in. He walks out. The pulmonary doctor comes in, shows him the same thing. They don't say anything. They just read it, give her the phone back, and leave. And that was it. After that, no one came in her room. No one. That was the first day she was in there, and she refused it. And she just did a non-rebreather. And I said, you need high flow oxygen. You need some rest, and you
need some movement. Yeah,
and
you need movement.
That's what she needed, and she did fine with it. And says, of course, now she says she has PTSD from the hospital, and which I don't blame her. And and she wrote a letter, and of course they didn't hear anything afterwards. But that's a situation we were in here with this, and her story is very common with just the lack of care, and the fear everybody had. No one wanted to get sick from COVID. And my feeling is we're physicians. You know what? We shouldn't have been afraid when AIDS patients were there, and we shouldn't be afraid when people have pneumonia. We shouldn't be afraid when people have COVID. It is what it is. And we chose this profession. Either way, the profession chose us or we chose it, but we're there, and it's our job, and that's what you do, and that's what you took an oath for.
Yeah, that's very brave, and that's why I really honor and respect you, because I think that's what you did, and you were treating, patients in the car park. You never said no, stuck to your protocol, stuck to your guns. So well done to you. And so the first thing you can say, and if we summarize that, is movement, whether you can stand, whether you can move, That's pretty important. And even if you can move or stand outside, and importance of that, and getting some vitamin D and getting sunlight into your eyes and setting the
Just movement, just
circadian rhythm.
breathing outside, just and it helps dissipate some anxiety, helps to take that fear level down. And that doesn't cost anything. And the second thing like that came to me was I didn't do this at first because I was just so focused on this fear and like, are they going to live? And we got to do this, and you got to. And when I came to this really quickly into it was, I told people you can't have any sugar, nothing, when you're sick. You shouldn't have any refined sugar anyways, but
Yeah.
can't have any refined sugar when you're sick. And studies shown that it paralyzes the white blood cells for up to 5 hours, and it feeds yeast infections and other bad bugs, and no sugar. So this nurse in the hospital calling me and says, look at the food they're sending me. And she takes a picture of the plate, and there's Jello, which is, how much sugar's in that plate of Jello? I don't even know. There's like a cookie for dessert. And I'm telling her, just don't eat that stuff. And how about we have your husband drop off some food for you? And which he did. Yeah. And they brought it up to her, in a bag, and, got it close enough to the bed where she could get to it. And that's what she primarily ate, was what he brought her. And, he brought her protein and, good food and, no sugar. And so I started quickly into this, telling people when they were sick, look, you got to move, number one. You got to keep sugar totally out of your diet, number two. And the third thing that really came forward that doesn't cost you much is they got to stay hydrated. And I would say dehydration was as big a factor as sending people to the hospital for this thing than as pulmonary congestion and low pulse ox, and they couldn't breathe things. But dehydration exacerbated / caused, well, it didn't cause it because the virus was there, but exacerbated that whole situation and made it nearly impossible to treat if they were dehydrated. In those car parking lot things you talked about, because at the beginning we didn't bring people in the office, we just treated them outside. And it was in March in Michigan and northern part of the US. And we got snow coming down, we got ice, we got 30, 28 degree weather. And we would hang these bags of saline outside the car on poles, and we were masters of putting IVs in the hands, these little things in the hands and they'd hang their hands out the car door, they'd roll the window down, and we'd just drip the IV in. The one problem we had, which we never really solved on this one, was especially on those cold nights and or the cold days, that bag would get cold. Yeah. And they would get cold, and they could be freezing in the car because they got this cold. So the heat would be pumping on the car. Yeah. And eventually we started telling people, bring blankets and, heating pads if you can plug them in the car. And we never really solved that issue, but then, what's to solve with that one? And, but they, keeping people hydrated. So I would tell people, you got to drink water and salt. You got to keep your electrolytes up with the salt, and you got to drink water to keep hydrated. And, no caffeine that dehydrates you, especially when you're sick. And, at least half your body weight in ounces in water. So if they weigh 200 pounds, 100 ounces of water. They weigh 75 kilos, maybe 100, 150, 160 pounds, maybe 80 ounces of water. And they got to have salt in every bit of water that they're drinking to keep the electrolytes up. Because otherwise they start cramping, and their lungs secretions get thicker, and they get harder breathing problems with it, and their brain gets dehydrated and they can't think clearly. I mean, we would see people come in, not only could they not breathe, they were dehydrated. So they're talking goofy. And, as this bag of saline, we would put the biggest catheter we could put in them, and we would just wide open it. And literally on a liter bag of saline, maybe 100 cc's, 200 cc's. What is that? 2 glasses of water, maybe 2 or 3 glasses of water, coming in with salt water coming into them. They start to perk up, and their brain and their color changes from pale and pasty to pink, and their brain starts working, and they stop being goofy. this is particularly true with old people, and old people become dehydrated really fast anyways when they get sick. But, I guess if I'm going to tell listeners, really three things you can focus on, especially with old people, when they get sick, is number one, they got to get out of bed, even just to stand. If they can't, just stand with them or do knee bends or, sit in a chair and do knee bends and leg bends. That's what I told that patient. I said, tell them to get you in a chair, because she said, I can't walk. I'm like, fine, stand outside your bed. I'm afraid I'm going to fall. And I told her, sit on the edge of the bed and move your legs up and down. As much, but if that's all you can do. And she said no one would come in, so she didn't want to stand the first day. So I said, just sit on the bed, move your legs up and down. And I said, if you're not sleeping, you should be on the edge of the bed moving your legs. And so first day, that's what she was doing with it. And it was just movement. So those three things that don't cost much money is the movement, the drinking water, and
no sugar. No sugar
in the diet. And those three things help so many people. And that's that. I would tell you, that's the big thing I learned, that we can, as doctors, we can focus on it's the old saying, you can't see the forest through the trees. You can see, do a hydrogen peroxide IV, take some vitamin C, take some vitamin A, but there's a whole forest there of that needs support too. And just doing those three things can really help people for any illness, and also keep you from getting that ill when you get sick. So I don't think those three things should be done continually anyways. But
brilliant. Let me dive a bit deeper, because in terms of what I found, I'd love to get your perspective, is having a look at the thickness of people's blood. We saw this post-COVID. I didn't pick it up early, but looking at fibrinogen was a key marker now. And I'm really working on that using serapeptase and using nattokinase, because I just know the thicker your blood is, I think, and I don't know what the research is, I don't know what your experience is, but the thicker your blood is, I think your immune system's going to struggle more. Post-COVID and post-vaccine, both of them, I just saw fibrinogen just increase dramatically. I'm seeing patients in their 60s and 70s having a double, amount of fibrinogen that they do in their blood. I mean, I don't know what the units are, but the range here is 1.8 to 3.5. I don't know if it's the same in the US. And I realized keeping patients more at the 2 level mark, they were coming in with 5 or 6 on a fibrinogen level. And I think that's what caused a lot of the clotting now, the thrombosis that are happening, the emboli that are happening. What's your view? Because, we use a lot of amounts of EPA, DHA to try and thin the blood, looking at products like the serapeptase and the nattokinase. What's your view on fibrinogen and the thickness of people's blood?
We saw the same thing, 100%. And we also checked D-dimer levels, quantitative D-dimer levels. And those people who were high in those D-dimer levels, they're the clotting ones, man. They got the PEs, they got the clots in the legs, they clotted. And you're 100% right. Fibrinogen, I would agree with everything you said. So we used, I've been using natto and seropeptidase and other systemic enzymes for years. And I started off using, at the beginning for COVID, when I realized this was a blood clotting disorder, I started putting people on natto right off the bat, man, when they were sick. And if they had a risk of clotting, they were on natto. And I didn't do that at the very beginning until I thought it through and, before. But once I saw the clotting stuff and the PEs and, things, I was using natto very freely. Now, I didn't use natto on everybody, but anyone who was more than mildly sick. The mildly sick ones I just kind of treated with our basic protocol. And the moderately and severely sick, I put them all on natto. And I found that people did not clot through natto. I found the ones who did clot, tremendous fibrinogen load, tremendous D-dimer quantitative numbers, very high. And they required more, longer periods, and it was rough and it was scary and it was, but the cool thing was with that is you could follow those numbers of fibrinogen particularly and a D-dimer, you could follow those numbers down and just sort of correlate clinically with how they were doing. And I'm sure you saw the same thing with it. They were fairly sick when it was fairly high. And then as they got better, you'd see this steady decline with it. And
but what's interesting is if the D dimer was normal, but the fibrinogen was up, it was quite an interesting case because now you got someone who, has got a normal D dimer, but has levels of, fibrinogen that are so high. Even in someone like myself, sitting up at the 3 mark, I've got it well down now with high EPA DHA and taking your NATO, your serapeptidase. So it's I don't know if COVID has done this. I mean, I got the Delta variant and I didn't check my fibrinogen before that, but afterwards it was significantly on the higher side of the range, which concerned me. My D9 was totally normal, but it stayed high for a long time. Now that is a worry. Is it the virus that caused that? That caused that? I mean, I'm not vaccinated, so it wasn't that. If people had COVID and got vaccinated, normal D dimers, but high fibrinogen.
We saw the same thing. The worst people were both of them, high D dimer and high fibrinogen. They were the worst. And you're right. The next group of people were these high fibrinogens with normal D dimer. Now the high fibrinogen normal D dimer, I didn't pick up many blood clots with them. I didn't pick up many PEs, they were concerned, but they weren't as big a concern as the ones with both those levels high. And I've been checking fibrinogen levels as part of my basic blood work for, I don't know, 20 to 25 years, something like that. And so a healthy person generally does not have high fibrinogen levels. I mean, that's been my experience with it. And, I've seen the same thing you've seen after COVID with these high fibrinogen levels and slow to come down. And usually when people eat better, exercise, and clean up, the diet is such a huge missing thing for so many people. I mean, you look like you eat a pretty good diet, I'm guessing.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, someone like myself, never missed a day's work in 24 years, not to sickness or ill health, never struggled with my immune system at all, very robust system. And I've got this high fibrinogen, and it's taken a lot of work to bring it down. 3 grams of EPA DHA every single day, serious nature and serapeptidase. So it's fascinating.
How much iodine do you take?
I take in the form of kelp. I don't know how much it works out to.
All right, so let me give you something. We can do another talk.
Yeah.
Start on higher dose iodine. There's not enough in kelp. And remember, if the kelp is grown in a polluted area of the ocean, the kelp has sodium iodine symporter, which can be overrun with bromide or fluoride and kick out iodine, just like the human body. I've never found kelp a great source because years ago, I tested brands of kelp for iodine and bromide and the halides, and different batches have different amounts of iodine. Some were high in bromide, some were, it was mostly bromide and iodine, interchangeable things. But the iodine was so variable. And anyway, and my feeling is in our polluted world with so much bromide and fluoride around, you can't get enough iodine in sea products anymore to kick out enough bromide and fluoride to make the body healthy. So what I found is that iodine can lower that fibrinogen level down, higher dose iodine. Now, most of my patients coming into this illness were on iodine. If they were previous patients of mine, they were already taking iodine because, I probably have 95 to 99% of my patients on iodine. The only ones that aren't on it usually have a side effect with it, which aren't many. Or I guess the ones who just kind of forget to take it after a while, but most people are on it. And
how much are they taking? I tell you, when I've given patients the iodine, it's affected their TSH, affected their thyroid. So I had to watch that TSH very carefully with the iodine.
Okay. So I think that I will remind you
of your book.
The book, I'm looking for the chapter in that book. Chapter, I think it's chapter 6, but of that. And a normal and expected response of giving people iodine who are iodine deficient is their TSH goes up. And it's not signifying hypothyroidism in the vast majority of people. Because if you check T3 and T4 levels, they're normal. Yeah. And you ask them how they're feeling, they'll tell you usually feeling better from the iodine or feeling okay, feeling fine. There's no complaints of, no increased complaints of hypothyroidism. And what the TSH does is it stimulates sodium iodine symporter. So if you think about it, the thyroid gland, which sits here, weighs 1.5 ounces. It produces a teaspoon of thyroid hormone for a whole year. It can only produce that thyroid hormone if there's enough iodine. Now, in our pretty much the entire world, particularly if you look at the WHO statistics, there's iodine deficiency throughout the entire world. And the more we overfarm our fields and industrialize our food products, the more iodine deficient we become as a people. So our iodine needs as a people now, 2023, is higher than what our parents and grandparents' iodine needs were in 1950 and 1960. Because they weren't exposed to so many toxins like we are now in our modern, all these, all our modern conveniences, and the world's more polluted now. So iodine concentrates in the thyroid gland, it concentrates in the breast, the ovaries, pancreas, uterus, all the other glandular tissue as well. And so the body has set up an intricate mechanism to concentrate iodine against a gradient. It requires an ATP molecule to do that. It requires magnesium to do that. And so iodine can go from higher in the blood to lower in the thyroid via this sodium iodine symporter. It's like a taxi cab that moves it across the cell membrane. It's an energy dependent process, so you use an energy molecule to do that. There's when you're low on iodine, and generally my view, I don't know how South African soil is. The U.S. soil is really low in iodine.
Well, I think it's probably even worse. We had Zach Bush out here saying we're the number one glyphosate user in the world, more than the States.
So when the human body, we were designed pretty darn well. Not complaining about our design. Well, I might complain about knees. We should have had better design in our knees that should be able to do hard sports till we're old age without screwing up our knees. But anyways, we're designed pretty well. And what we're not designed to do is leave these taxi cabs, these sodium iodine symporters, just idling on the membrane of the thyroid, waiting for iodine to come to put it in there. If there's no iodine, those symporters go away. And we just function in a low iodine state. And luckily, we're designed to survive a low iodine state. And it's been through humankind's existence. If you look at some of those, we were in Italy right before the crisis, and I remember walking through the Vatican and looking at all those old paintings. You could see all these goiters in these women in their old paintings, from time of Christ, so 2,300 years ago. Iodine deficiency and goiter has been known to occur in human existence probably since the beginning of humans. I don't know exactly when, but when you take iodine, the first thing the body does is have to make more taxi cabs, sodium iodine symporters, to move that iodine into the thyroid, into the breast, into the ovaries, into the uterus, into the prostate, the pancreas, and wherever else it needs to go. And so what stimulates those taxi cabs to be made is TSH. So it is normal and it's expected in someone who's iodine deficient when they take iodine and I don't want to use the word high amounts because I don't think it's high amounts. I think it's sufficient amounts, but in higher amounts of iodine, that TSH will go up in order to stimulate these symporters to be produced. Once enough iodine gets in the thyroid, the ovaries, uterus, breast, prostate, pancreas, TSH comes down. And it takes about, in the average person, 3 to 6 months. So many people misinterpret that TSH as I'm making them hypothyroid. It's iodine-induced hypothyroidism. Well, all you got to do is ask the patients, how do you feel? No, look, some people don't feel good with vitamin C. Some people don't feel good with magnesium. Some people feel lousy when they drink water. But some people do feel lousy when they take iodine too. They're in my experience, it's a very, when iodine is used as part of a holistic treatment regimen with enough salt in coming in with it, that the side effects from iodine, which I think are related to bromine toxicity and bromine being released and fluoride probably being released, that they get overloaded, that just doesn't happen. And the vast majority of people feel better. We have I believe 6 practitioners in my office right now seeing patients. And the vast majority of our patients are on iodine. If we were causing this massive hypothyroid or Hashimoto's epidemic in our practice, A, we'd be out of business, and B, we'd be hearing about it patient after patient. We don't hear about it because our patients seem to do pretty well with it. So it is normal and expected for iodine to cause TSH to rise. You follow T3 and T4 levels, You see your patients back, ask them how they feel, do an exam, and assuming that they don't have signs of worsening whatever illness they're having or new onset hypothyroidism, you just have to wait for that TSH to come down. Now, all the literature.
How does that help with the fibrinogen then? Giving them iodine.
You know what? I'm not quite certain of the mechanism how it helps with fibrinogen, but I can tell you that because I've done this on people where I have them. If they were on iodine going into COVID, my instructions were double your iodine. I didn't care what dose they were taking, just double it. If they weren't on iodine, I put them on 25 milligrams. That was our protocol orally for it. So when I did when we drew blood on the patients, and I didn't draw it on every patient. Certainly, I don't do that now. But you'd see these high fibrinogen levels, and as soon as I hit them double, look, we did this with other things because they were told them no sugar. We told them to drink water. We told them to take vitamin A and D, but their fibrinogen did come down, and I think I attributed a lot of that fibrinogen coming down to just iodine. That there seemed to be some effect with iodine with it. I really don't know the mechanism to tell you. Just an observation with it.
Fantastic. Let's move on to ferritin. There's been a lot of. I've been doing functional medicine now 16 years. This seems to be quite a contentious issue. The numbers, I had Morley Robbins on my podcast and looking at numbers of ferritin, and he's saying the ideal ratio is 20 to 50. I was keeping women at between 50 and 80 and men between like 90 and 120. It seems like ferritin is less important, and the use of copper. I'm measuring serum copper now. It looks like serum copper being the master and the captain of ferritin, and ferritin being the foot soldier, that too high levels of ferritin are causing significant oxidative stress in the body, causing significant problems with liver enzymes like GGT. What is your view on ferritin? I tell you what happened to my ferritin. Went from like 150 down to about 70 after COVID. I had the Delta. It took me a couple of days, and I was, over the weekend, I was fine. I was strong. It was like a normal head cold for me. But what's your view on ferritin? What's happened to ferritin with COVID, and where do you keep your patients' levels at?
Those are all very, very good questions. Stuff that I think about too. And we know as practitioners, ferritin is an acute phase reactant, which means it can go up when there's inflammation in the body, and it doesn't necessarily mean. So ferritin is a measure of iron storage, and so when ferritin levels are high, those physicians that are only checking ferritin levels might say you have too much iron. Well, that's not. If you don't check the other iron indices, you don't know that that's the case. So I never draw ferritin alone. I draw ferritin with total iron binding capacity, iron total, and percent saturation. And then you get a better picture. Is this ferritin elevation, or is this secondary to iron overload? So there's a lot of people that suffer with iron overload, and I diagnose that very frequently in my practice, and frequently have patients phlebotomizing. Now, whether you want to call them hemochromatosis or not, which is a genetic disease for iron overload, doesn't matter. I see 10 people have iron overload for one hemochromatosis. So they have the same problem, too much iron, and it clogs, makes the blood thick, more likely to clot. And it can cause, organ problem, in the kidneys and the liver and the heart. So it is important. And ferritin, I agree with you, the relationship between ferritin and copper. It's interesting with COVID. I've been checking serum copper and plasma zinc levels. It's just part of a routine that I do for new patient blood tests. And once a year, I do it on all my patients because I want to see copper levels higher than zinc levels. And what I found during COVID, because so many groups were talking about zinc as an ionophore and zinc to be used with hydroxychloroquine. You heard from first the holistic practitioners, and then really the regular doctors were all promoting zinc, 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 zinc. So everyone starts taking zinc, 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 zinc. What I started to see was, instead of levels like this, my patients, I started getting this, I would tell them you're zinc overloaded. Now, I can't tell you I saw any big. There's no syndrome that I've seen. You can get zinc toxic, and I didn't see anyone get levels like that. But I did see some subtle shifts in the immune system when the zinc levels were too high and the copper levels were too low. I would see slightly lowered white blood cell count. I'd see lymphocytes up, neutrophils down just a little bit. They were still in the reference range. And if you weren't looking for it, you weren't going to see it. And I also would observe that patients who have this seem to get more frequent viral infections. And they were getting hit a little more frequently with, I mean, I can't tell you they were hit more frequent with COVID because we weren't really checking for it. And we were treating viral infections, whether you had COVID or RSV or it didn't really matter to us, what you had. We treated it the same way. But my treatment for that was to have them stop taking zinc, and I put them on copper if the copper levels weren't too low, copper for a month or two, and let that copper come up and restore itself to the balance. And you'd see the white blood cells shift again. And the neutrophils come up and the lymphocytes come down. And they just didn't, they would stop getting their frequent illnesses. So in regards to iron, I agree with you. I think copper is really important. We know copper is really important for the immune system and for white blood cells. And now you can get copper overloaded too. Women taking birth control pills frequently have high copper levels and low zinc levels. And instead of like this, they're like, you can't see from my hand, but their copper's way up here and zinc is way down here. They don't, they're not feeling well when that's the case either. So at that point, for women on birth control pills, I really find it difficult to get that balance restored, unless they stop birth control pills. Those women I would put on zinc and not copper, but that just doesn't seem to restore itself very easily unless they come off birth control pills. So there's a huge correlation with that. And look, all these metals, zinc, iron, copper, are, it's just so incredibly important to have adequate amounts and have them in the proper balance. Yeah. And when these things become out of balance, man, people don't do well. And, iron, as you mentioned earlier, iron is very oxidizing in the body. Look at our cars, especially if you live near the ocean, and they rust out really easily because the iron, just that salt, sets in motion the oxidation process of iron, and you start rusting out, and we can rust out in our bodies when that happens.
So tell me, Doc, then what levels are you keeping at ferritin? Because this is something that's very debatable. I mean, the levels go up to 400. I mean, I think it's from, say, 20 to 400, the levels and the range here in South Africa. And so many people, 155 podcasts I've done and spoke to a lot of functional medicine docs. There's a lot of confusion at what levels ferritin should be at because of the effect, how important it is in the immune system. Speaking to the Thomas Levy's of the world, speaking to Morley Robbins, listening to Dr. McCullough, what he's saying about iron, keeping his iron levels at like 37 or 40. Previously, he had like 80, 90, 150. I mean, these are significant changes. Doing phlebotomies like at least 4 times a year as often as you can. It seems, it's important.
So those are all really good questions. And so before we get to what levels, I will tell you, we do a lot of phlebotomies in our practice. We diagnose a lot of iron overload. Ferritin should be checked with an iron panel, the other 3 iron tests that I talked about earlier, period. But if you're not doing that, you don't, doesn't matter what the level of ferritin is. You don't really know whether it's high because of an inflammation somewhere in the body or there's too much iron. So whenever I check ferritin, I check the other iron indices. So having said that, I don't really look at ferritin as a single number. I look at ferritin in conjunction with the other iron indices. And so if the other iron indices are in pretty good shape, and what I mean by pretty good shape is I'll take the median of TIBC, percent saturation, and I wish I had a labs up in front of a number thing in front of me right now. You know what? Hang on. I'll keep talking, but let me see if I can get it on my mouse, because I do have I have reference ranges from the lab.
No, let me pull up mine because it's quite interesting. This now.
I have it here too. I think it's on my desktop.
Go for it.
And I can't minimize Zoom. All right, I can't see it when I got you in. So if the TIBC, percent saturation, and iron total are sort of around the median range of each of those reference ranges. So the median is add the lower number plus a high number and divide by 2.
Yeah.
And then if that ferritin, I don't get wiggy about the ferritin when the other numbers are in line and the ferritin, you're not going to see a ferritin of 5 when everything else is in the median. You might see a ferritin of, I'm just going to freestyle here with you, but you might see a ferritin of 20, 25. I don't consider that low in that patient. Now, if a ferritin's 20 and the percent saturation is 10% and the TIBC is high, the numbers, I don't have the ranges right here, but the TIBC is high and the total iron is low, then that's a low ferritin level. And they need iron, and I will push it up to get those other numbers up there, and then the ferritin falls where it may fall. I don't get so hyped up on the ferritin. When I remember 30 years ago, I saw a couple lectures, and ferritin should be at 100. That was, ferritin should be at 100. And there's a prominent lecturer right now who still talks about that. And look, I can tell you in these young menstruating women, their ferritin ain't getting to 100 no matter what you do. And they're menstruating every month, they're losing blood, and a lot of them feel pretty good with ferritins of 30, 20, maybe 25. And I don't get caught up in what that number should be. I don't think ferritin should be in the over 100 in anybody. I don't phlebotomize them when they're 150 or maybe 120, as long as those other iron indices aren't too high. But I think it's a big slog in the mud to try and keep everyone's ferritin at 70, at 80, at 90, 100. And I don't think that slog has to happen if you're checking the other levels and sort of correlating it together. And, I said it at the beginning of this, but if those other levels are okay, you ain't going to see a ferritin of 5, which is really low. And it's just not going to be there because the iron storage is going to be up a little bit. It might be 20, might be 25, which is still a little on the low side. My feeling is with the other iron indices normal, ferritin will catch up, or it's just where it is. And I did find during COVID, if you check ferritin levels, man, some of those ferritins were really high, 500, 600, 1,000. And those people were sick and they were clotting. And, it wasn't ferritin that was clotting them. It was just a ferritin was that blinking red light saying something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong. When you got the inflammation down, that came down with it. Yeah. But I think that it's a useful number, but I think it's only useful if you're checking the other numbers with it and thinking about the whole iron panel as sort of one being and not just ferritin alone over here.
Brilliant. Well, Doc, tell me about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. What's going to happen? Is there going to be a change sort of in the medical system? Is there going to be a change in sort of political governance? I know you guys are friends, and he wrote that brilliant book called The Real Anthony Fauci. Just, give us some hope because I think a lot of this has been driven politically. It's just politically driven more than medically driven. I mean, I understand a lot of the doctors are not open to functional medicine or open to holistic medicine, but a lot of this was driven through political means and political control, enslavement to systems, to big pharma and to big medicine, what I call big, hospital groups and that. So let us know what he's saying. I know you guys probably talk because you can give us the inside track of what's happening, because a lot of the countries follow the US and what you guys are doing and how you guys are shaping.
Well, I don't know how many countries are following us anymore after what we've done through this crisis. That's we've lost our credibility through this. But so you get to hear the whole story of RFK, which I'll make it quick here. But Allison and I followed RFK Jr. since before he got involved in this whole mercury and vaccine thing, when he was an environmental lawyer for water keepers. And his whole mantra we started following him around 1990 or so, but his mantra from the 1990s up until he formed Children's Health Defense in the 2000s somewhere was every lake in the U.S. is polluted with mercury from coal burning and from other sources, but coal burning was the big one. and that therefore the fish are polluted, and that's wrong, and we should hold polluters accountable, and we should clean up our water supply. So we were donating money, what we could yearly. And then when he formed Children's Health Defense, which I don't know the year he formed it, we made a big donation right away, because that this was right up my alley, man. I was already talking about vaccines and mercury in vaccines before I was talking about it in the 90s. And so he called me when we made that donation to thank me, and we exchanged phone numbers and became friendly at that time. And I would text him here and there, and he'd text me back. And then I was setting up through the International College of Integrative Medicine a vaccine conference, and I wanted to do a conference on childhood vaccines. This was before COVID, so this was about 2000. So it was 2017 or so. Got the permission from my board of directors, which I was on, to set up this conference. And so they said, how long? Let's do the next conference, which was a year away. I'm like, no, I need 2.5 to 3 years. Why do you need so long? Because I'm going to get RFK to headline it, and he's probably really busy. He's not going to have anything on his schedule 2.5 to 3 years out. That was my take. So fine, they gave me 3 years from when we agreed to do it, which fell into September of 2020. So in 2017, I called RFK. Hey, I'm going to put on this vaccine conference. Will you headline it? And he said, well, I've got nothing on my schedule for 3 years. Yeah, I'll headline it. I said, all right, the only stipulation is Allison and I have to take you out to dinner the night before. And he agreed. So now we're moving into 2020. The conference is coming, and then COVID starts. So I was posting all my, patient interviews and what we were doing in our practice and how people were doing better. And I would interview the patients, and I was posting articles and my comments on it. And then I get a letter from the Federal Trade Commission, which is part of the U.S. government. 2 days later, I get a notice from the State Board of Medicine. I'm under investigation. And shortly after that, I get a notice from my med school that I went to that they were squawking. And so I posted the Federal Trade Communication letter on my website, and said I was taking the Federal Trade Communication said there's no treatment, prevention, or cure for COVID. Therefore, any mention of such falls in violation of federal code, blah, 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 blah. Either you remove everything you wrote about that within 48 hours, or you're going to hear from the U.S. Justice Department. And so, I posted that letter. We were stunned. Here I was doing what I was taught to do, was treat people who were sick, instead of closing my office and telling them I'll talk to them virtually and do an exam on them and whatever. And so we posted this letter and put a little personal note saying, I think I'm going to take my website down. And 2 people called me. RFK called me, and Del Bigtree called me. And they both said, you need to talk to Aaron Seary. And Aaron Seary is a constitutional lawyer who was suing the FDA for things before COVID. And then as COVID came, he really started suing the U.S. government to get data and get information, and get them to release things. So we called Aaron Seary, and he did a little research on what they were charging me with. And he basically told me, and so did RFK, they told me, hey, it's a good law, because the law was to prevent false advertising, and this is a cure for cancer. This is a cure for something, really isn't. And he said, but they're misapplying the law to you. And all 3 of them told me the same thing. So basically we were advised to take everything down. If you want to fight them, we hired a First Amendment lawyer. After spending a lot of money, he said to us, I'll take the case. It'll probably go to the Supreme Court. I don't know if you'll win or lose, but I need a $10 million retainer.
Wow.
And I'm like, well, I'm on a Zoom with you, and I'm
exactly.
Like, hey, I made that money.
Yeah,
I made that money. And so now 4 of them are telling us the same thing. Just take everything down, see if it goes away. And if they come after you, then we'll figure it out. You have to do something different. So we took everything down, and we complied, which is what they, wanted us to do. And so RFK came, did that conference. We had our dinner the night before. And my experience, that was the first time we met face to face. My experience with him is he's the smartest person I've ever met in my life. He can talk about so many things off the cuff. He's really charismatic, and he's the real deal. And he understands the issues of censorship and fascism and corporatoscity, or whatever that word is. Corporate and government join hands and basically enslave us. And I think he can bring real change to what we need to do. And I think that they're trying to censor him, but I don't think it's going to work. Not in today's world with the internet and people not trusting media right now and not trusting big government and looking for a solution. And at least here, I can tell you, because we're in a presidential election year, there ain't nobody here who wants Trump versus Biden again. And we want to change. And so I think he'll offer it to us. I think he's the right guy to do it. And I think that, one of the things I commented after we had dinner and we took him back to his hotel room and we're walking back to our hotel before the lecture the next morning, I said to Allison, as soon as we left him, I said, it's like he's made of steel. Like I asked him a question at dinner and I said, aren't you sorry you took this topic on vaccines? He goes, what topic? I said, vaccines. Why? Well, look at all the criticism you've received. Your relatives have written op-eds against you in the New York Times and elsewhere. And he said, David, I'm in the right place. I'm at the right time. I'm doing what I should be doing. I know it in my heart. They'll come around. They're just misguided right now.
Sure.
And he said, are you sorry you took it on? And I said, no, I'm not sorry I took it on. But I said, do you feel stress over it? And he goes, no, I don't feel any stress over it. He goes, do you? And I'm like, yeah, I feel stress over it. And my take from that was that the guy's made of steel. He's really tough, and he can handle the criticism, and he's super smart. He would be a wicked debater to debate against, and he's not emotional about the topic. He's just sort of very rational and very 1 + 1 is 2, and just talks about the topic as he sees it. And he's very committed to it. And he's the right guy for what we need right now. That's my view. And I've never felt, I told Allison, well, Allison, I've never donated to a political candidate. I never wanted to get involved in that stuff. And, it's all just ugly to me. And it always has been. This is the first time we've sent money to a political candidate and that I've actually been excited over. And I think that he's what we need right now. And maybe, look, people used to look up to us as a country and, look what we've done. And we can lead, the world in civil rights and, at least hopefully promote it and things like that. We've lost it all after COVID. I feel like, who the hell's going to look up to us? And I think part of we're seeing this chaos in the world, and there's just chaos everywhere. There's violence everywhere. People are not talking nice everywhere. And we've just lost our way as a people. And the part of it is we don't have strong enough leaders that have a good vision and a good energy and a good focus of where we need to go. And he could give all that to us. And I'm hopeful that he can, for lack of better words, catch fire. His candidacy can catch fire, and I think it will. And I think it's people are just hungry for this right now. And knowing him personally, if anyone could do this, it's RFK Jr.
Well, that is a bit giving us some hope there, Dr. Brownstein. And if there's any ever chance that you can come on the Made to Thrive show and you get any glimpse ever, I'd really appreciate that. But, for South Africa and just what, the WHO brought upon us and the following of sort of medical interventions in this country, you guys are still leading in many ways. I know you might seem there's chaos and people have lost hope, but you're still affecting many countries internationally and how medicine gets practiced, fortunately or unfortunately, because so much great has come out of America with regards to interventions. But I want to just once again declare favor and blessing upon you and thank you for your time and and your courage and just your continual learning that you've been done over so many years, and how many lives you've impacted. Honestly, I do think of you every day. I'm gonna look at the iodine and possibly add that to my protocol.
Right.
And
So we got to talk after you start using iodine. We got to talk. You're going to see the good results, but use it as part of a holistic protocol. Make sure that you use salt with iodine, like a teaspoon or two a day with the iodine, which will help usher up bromide and fluoride that get loosened up, from competitive inhibition. And then you shouldn't see. I mean, you might see some negative effects, but there shouldn't be many of them, and they should be manageable. And very, very few patients can't take iodine in the doses I'm talking about. So let's talk after you get some experience with that. We'll talk again. And I love doing this interview with you, Steve.